The decisions we're making here, yes, I'm doing it for the benefit of my own community members, but any opportunity I have to help influence the role cities will play in doing climate action will only be beneficial as they're negotiating at the high levels what the country is committing to.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Rich Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of the Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. Through this podcast, I'm speaking with leaders of nonprofits, governments, academics, and the corporate space about the work they're doing to solve the challenges that we face. Through this episode, I'm extremely excited to be joined by Barbara Buffaloe, who is the mayor of Columbia, Missouri. Before being elected mayor of Columbia, she served as Columbia's first sustainability manager. Mayor Buffaloe is also the chair of the Environmental Committee of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and was part of the recent delegation representing the U.S. mayors at COP28 in December 2023, which is a lot of work, Madam Mayor. So it's great to have you here. And as a starting point, it'd be great to have a personal introduction about who you are and the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. So, I came to Columbia, Missouri for college in the late 90s and really fell in love with this city. When my husband and I were deciding, where to settle, we came back to Columbia. And around that time was the popularity of green building was becoming more mainstream. I got my LEED accredited professional certification. And from there, really worked on trying to figure out how do we make green buildings part of just the norm. In 2010, fast forward, the city of Columbia received an energy efficiency and conservation block grant from the Department of Energy. When we did that, I realized, well, you know what? I'm an okay designer, but I think I could maybe influence people to do more sustainability choices. I threw my name in the hat and was hired in 2010. So fast forward 11 years, I was still working for the city. By then I had a team of employees working with me, which was a lot nicer than just the one. And I had the privilege of being part of a large national network, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, where you got to see those best practices in other communities. So when our previous mayor said he wasn't going to run for mayor again, I took that knowledge of all those things that our city had done and could still do, along with the best practices of what other communities were doing. And I thought, well, I'll throw my name into this hat as well.
When you put your name in the hat, what were the skills that you thought that you brought that were unique to that pool of, candidates at the time?
Well, I think really leaning into those best practices, the knowledge of them in other cities, and what was happening that we could do better. The other thing was just the fact that I was a known entity here, right? I'd worked in the community. When you work in sustainability, you have to work with all departments within the city. You have to work with a lot of community members. And so, people knew who I was and knew that my heart was in this. I don't think that it would be as easy for a sustainability person to just run for office in any community unless they're known, right? They have to be part of that community to have established those relationships. But I think it did definitely, it's given me a lot more confidence in seeing the future and seeing how we can do better. I will tell you, it is really weird to move from being behind the scenes to being the scene. That's definitely a learning curve that I had to use extra training with, how to move from being a staff member to the elected leader. That was definitely a weird transition.
What about the vision? How did your vision as a professional have to change? Because for the previous 10 years, you've really been out there saying, climate and sustainability. How has that changed as mayor? Can you still run that forward as the lead, or do you now have to really focus a little bit more on the community needs, maybe the S side of sustainability?
Yeah, I think something that I did when I was in my previous role and then I've continued in this is to help make those ties, right? When we're talking about things like public safety or basic living needs of our community members, change affects those, right? As we're seeing extreme heat in the summertime, we know that we have the potential for a rise in crime. We know that when people have to use their air conditioning or their heating in the seasons, that could affect their pocketbook and their daily budget. And so connecting those two things, I think, is an important aspect of this piece. And I did it before and I continue to do it today.
And do you also pick up more of the social side of those issues now, or before is more of a climate and environmental side of that? And then how do you align them? How do you communicate them down to the population that you're working with?
The social issues have never not been part of the conversation. We've always talked about, the three-legged stool or the triple bottom line or anything else you want to use for those when we talk about people, planet, and profit, and just thinking about what it is that we can do to make sure that the people who we're making policies for are not negatively affected by the decisions we're making.
How do you know what the right balance is when it comes down? Because, sometimes I think we have the short term and this long term challenge. We're trying to show people if we make these changes over the long term, we'll be more resilient, our economy will be stronger, we will be better. But there's a short term reality, which is, okay, it costs a little bit more this winter for your heating. What are the balance points that you see there?
Well, before the decision is made, we try to figure out what would be those unintended consequences and what can we do to alleviate them or at least make them a little bit smaller.
Yeah.
So, for instance, with the utility rates increase, can we increase how much money we're putting into our energy efficiency programs so that as utility rates go up, hopefully the homes won't be demanding as much electricity because we made them more efficient. So we try to be more proactive with that before the decision is made.
How did your previous work as sustainability manager kind of help equip you for this job as mayor? And not only that, but just the communications, the engagement with your teams and the community.
To be honest, part of it is when I was working sustainability, when I first started with the city in 2010, it was still really rare for a city to have a sustainability person on staff. So you had to work to win over people to show that you were not coming in to try to take away anything within their life or make their lives harder. You were in trying to really make it better, especially for them, but also future generations. So I think that sort of practice of building those relationships and getting those the collaboration done was definitely a big role that's helped me today. The other thing I think that it's really helped me was because not everyone was always happy to have me come into a meeting because I might be suggesting they do something different. I have pretty thick skin. It's not to say that it doesn't hurt when people say rude or mean things, but I have the ability to kind of just like compartmentalize it and still focus on what it is we're working on.
Who do you reach out in terms of like professional peers to, learn from, be inspired by, maybe call up on a bad day?
Yeah, so I'm really lucky that I still serve I'm an advisor to the board for the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. This is a network of sustainability staff within cities and counties across North America. And so since that, I still get to like see them and kind of lean into their optimism and hope and the work that they're doing. Also being a part of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and climate mayors, and then also having the phone numbers for a lot of mayors, especially women mayors. I rely on them a lot to kind of, walk through, what did you did what? How did you do that?
And are there more mayors or even governors now that are really from a sustainability background or focus on sustainability of the city, the resources, the state, whatever it may be?
You're definitely seeing a lot more have an emphasis on climate change and climate action and social justice and environmental justice.
Yeah.
As far as who were professional sustainability staffers, I think I was the first mayor who had that title first, working in a sustainability manager for a city. But funny enough, the new mayor coming into Memphis, Tennessee, was Memphis's first sustainability person when he was a planner. And so I of course reached out to him when he won election, and I was like, "There's two of us now." But you're seeing more and more getting in. There's a council member in Asheville, North Carolina, that used to be their sustainability person and is now a ward representative. So it's just really fantastic to see that. And I think it's because of what I said, we had to talk with every department, all community members. So we have a breadth of relationships to fall back on and use as we're pushing forward with our mission.
What are the challenges that a small city faces when it comes to sustainability? I mean, what are the ones that you kind of put at the forefront right now in terms of the vision and strategy that you have for the city itself?
So it's not necessarily small to mid-size. It's more of like location within the country. Right now, they're doing passenger rail investment from the Department of Transportation for Amtrak and other passenger rail lines. They're going to make maybe some improvements to the Kansas City St. Louis line, but like it doesn't come through Columbia. Similarly, we're in where we are, people are not used to living in dense living. We're an hour and a half from St. Louis, an hour and a half from Kansas City.
Right.
So when I talk about urban density and the need to have more housing units, transit-oriented development, those sort of things, that's not necessarily a pressure, considering it only takes you 20 minutes to drive across town. But I also don't want to sprawl. I don't want to go into the green space. And so that's a challenge that we have because the urgency is not there. I would also say that the urgency is not there when talking to people about climate change, because since
Yeah.
we're in the middle of the middle, we don't have, coastal flooding. We're not having hurricanes. We're not
Yeah.
having some issues that our coast peers are having. But again, some of these things are just not forefront in the minds of Missourians. And
Yeah.
so trying to figure out what are those other ways to get them to talk about it and encouraged about it that can get us there.
Yeah, actually, I know you were on the Heartland, China trip recently, and I think I was actually in St. Louis when you made the trip over, which was quite funny. And one of the issues I keep coming back to as a Missourian and Midwesterner is the issue of kind of water and agriculture and how we trade that water out, And so I think I've had a lot of discussions with people who are in this space of agriculture and water, and the link just really isn't there, even if the Mississippi and the Missouri are their absolute bottoms that they've ever had.
Yeah, I think, I did just get back from that trip, and it was really interesting to see. So we were doing like a Mississippi River Valley to Yangtze River Valley kind of exchange. So they'll be coming
Mm,
here next year and talking
great.
with the researchers along that area. And it was interesting to have this conversation because, Missouri, agriculture is one of our major economies, or we're an ag economy.
Mhm.
But we don't necessarily think about the long-term effects of some of the decisions that we've made. I think for me as a medium-sized city in Missouri, my water quality can be affected by upstream decisions within agriculture. But I don't have control over that.
What are some of the major gaps that you're facing in terms of awareness, resources that prevent you from getting that alignment to action?
I would say one of the basic ones, and this is not just for sustainability, this is for all things, is that we're suffering really from a polarization within
Mm,
politics, within our communities, that is affecting our ability to really get change made, because these other things are bursting up and they're all of a sudden an emergency that you need to see to. It's harder and harder to stay focused on what we're doing because people are kind of making these false dichotomies. And so
mhm.
there's a struggle that we have. I would say one of the other issues is just making sure that I have enough workforce to do
Mhm.
the jobs that we have. I have so many vacancies across all the departments of the city that I have
Mm.
budgeted for, which means I have funding for. And then also, there's historic funding coming right now out of the federal government. A lot of it is going towards sustainability projects and programs, but it's on how to attract that money to a mid-sized community that might not have the same level of outcome that you would get from a larger city.
So, what are the skill sets or mindsets that you draw on daily to get the work done?
I heard a really good, probably about 6 months into my job, is my current job. I heard a really good saying. This was, don't let people live rent free in your head. And
Mm.
it was because I was going into every meeting trying to think of all the arguments that were going to be made for every single thing. And I realized I was spending so much time creating my defense that I
Yeah.
was not necessarily thinking about the positive offense, the why we were doing some of the efforts we were doing. So when I kind of took that bug out of my ear and really focused on the long-term effects and the operational excellence we were creating, it
Yeah.
fill me. It made me a little bit more confident in what we were doing going forward. A colleague of mine said this, and it really spoke to me. It's, people are not afraid of change, they're afraid of loss. And
Mm.
the idea that if I can help show that they're not losing
Yeah.
anything that makes their life special and wonderful, it's just, you know what I mean? We're evolving it. And so that's kind of helping focus on that, I think is definitely a skill set that I had to develop, but that I really
Yeah.
lean on every day.
Yeah, it's tough because you have all these big issues and you have to make these small wins. How do you communicate? We're just going to move the ball a little bit closer down to the goalpost.
That's something that I actually need to improve upon. I think, well, you mentioned, like how to balance all of the different
Mm.
demands on it. And that is a really hard thing, right? To show
Mhm.
like, all right, last night council voted on this. This is why and what it's related to.
Yeah.
Maybe because the day after a council meeting, I have 9 other meetings to go to on the next thing we're working on. And so
Hmm.
it is a challenge. And Columbia is a council manager form of government. So it's not like the mayor and the council are the ones kind of like pulling the levers every day. I'm trying to find that balance for how to then report about what we're doing and push it forward, while also acknowledging I want the staff to get the credit because they're the ones getting the job done. And so it's
Hmm.
that balance of trying to make sure that the communication, the word is getting out, and that those who are doing the work are getting the recognition for it.
So if we were talking like, say, the renewable goal that you have, And this is a goal that you set. What are the steps to actually executing that? Like, what's involved? Who plays a part in that? And then to the point of your team gets it done. Like, how long does that take? And what are the major steps along the path for you?
So for our renewable energy goal, one of the things that we did was we basically tasked the staff with coming up with a plan to meet it.
Yeah.
They review it both on like what is available right now and is supposed to be available soon, but
Hmm.
also what's the cost. And so
Hmm.
for the forecasting there, our already investment in some of the long-term coal contracts that the city signed under previous administrations is affecting our ability to have renewable energy right now. And so from our utilities standpoint, they are going to their advisory board and will come back to us on a recommendation for how to get as aggressive as possible as soon as possible. Our ratepayers are the residents, and
Yeah.
they're the ones who also need a vote in the say of what we do.
And yeah, to the point of they need to vote, how do you present that to them? Do you give them, this is the percentage and this is the price, or this is the price over time? Like, how do you communicate with them? And then when they vote, are they voting on a couple different options? Like, how does that play out?
So for us, they basically have voted to create a municipal electric utility like in the early 1900s, which is given the mission of providing reliable, consistent, and as low cost as possible electricity. In 2004, the city of Columbia was the first in Missouri that had a voter initiated renewable energy portfolio standard, which set, the scale percentages to go up. And that did go to the voters. That was one of the first then. And so since then, you're seeing communities kind of just do it. They're not necessarily going to their voters about it. I think if we were to have any sort of major rate increase or bonding that was needed for renewable energies, I think that would be the time to go to the voters and say, okay, if you really do want this, like you say you do, here's what it's going to cost.
Okay, now speaking of if this is what you want to do and here's what it's going to cost, you just came back from Dubai.
Yeah.
What did you take away from that time as a mayor from Missouri? What was the activity for you, and what were some of your takeaways?
I was there as part of a delegation from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and so I was with mayors, another 5 mayors, representing everything from New Orleans to Des Moines, Washington D.C., and Columbus, Ohio. And Burnsville, Minnesota. And so as we were talking, we're giving the examples on some of the panels about how climate change is affecting our community. Obviously, Mayor Cantrell in New Orleans had some prime examples, even this year with the salt water coming into their water infrastructure. So we were talking about our own examples. A lot of the conversation was also around support from the federal government. Sitting on a panel with mayors from the European Union and listening to all the support that they get and the direction that they get from their federal governments was very different than kind of the fluctuations we experience in the United States. So that makes sense why they could be ahead of us in some of the things, because they've just had long-term consistent investments in those policies and programs. I'll tell you the thing that was, while it was lovely to meet with mayors, it was awkward to meet with them like in Dubai, like couldn't we just get together in the US? But you know what? I probably wouldn't have an opportunity to meet with the White House Chief Sustainability Officer in Missouri, right? It happened in Dubai because that's where he was and where we were at the same time. But also it was just inspirational to hear the stories from around the world about how climate change is affecting other communities. Reminded me that we're part of a bigger picture, right? So the decisions we're making here, yes, I'm doing it for the benefit of my own community members, but the extra benefit is that hopefully it's making the lives better in some of like these African countries who were talking about the women's health effects from climate change. So I think that to me was inspiring, and any opportunity I have to help influence the role cities will play in doing climate action will only be beneficial as they're negotiating at the high levels what the country is committing to.
Do you think it's on the states and cities to actually solve these problems? Or, in America, are we waiting for the federal government to come up with a standard that they can be consistent with? Like, how do you view that?
Yeah, I think if we're waiting for the federal government, we're going to be waiting for a long time. I will say, the Biden administration has done historical investments right now in climate action for states and for cities. I know, and this is just because we're so big And we have so
Mhm.
many different voices at the table that having these sort of networks within cities and states working on these actions together and collaborating together will is
Mhm.
it's what's going to move us forward, right? It's not right now we're trying to build the capacity within our cities,
Yeah.
so that when funding does become available, or when we have a project or program we can do, we can act on that, and we have the base of which to do that.
So if you were talking to a city, what are a couple things you'd give them advice for, starting that process or moving a little bit further in their own city to identify, address, invest into, the future of that city?
The easiest thing to do first is to look in-house at what you could do better. And
Yeah.
so us, is doing energy audits in city facilities, measuring our greenhouse gas emissions impact, and like what could our community do, where are areas of improvement,
Mhm.
and then start to make those actions and start to fund those improvements so that you can see those wins and you can see the benefit that happened from them, so that then
Yeah.
from then on you can go forward and make even more positive change.
What's the focus for you going forward going to be after your mayorship? Are you going to stay within elected kind of, the politics of this and drive change that way, or do you see yourself going outside again and having a different role somewhere?
I'm not really sure. I think mayor's as high as I want to go. In part because when you're the mayor, you get to see the change happen. And so that's rewarding to get to see. And I don't necessarily see that my state representatives or federal representatives get to see that. And so I think I need that in order to be sort of motivated and inspired to continue in the work. I don't think I'll ever be able to get out of government completely. I think I'll always be supporting, because local government has such an
Mhm.
impact on the communities that we serve.
Yeah.
So I think I'd probably work in some sort of supporting local governments and helping either their electeds get more skill set to do their job effectively, or their staff members to motivate and get them to really think about the impacts they're having,
Mhm.
because it is really rewarding to work in this space.